C'est aussi ça. Good. Glad you came as you said you would. Wonderful. You can do a phone check to see if it's on silent. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Giribardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Giribardhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Radhanata Radha Radhanata Radhe. Jaya Giri Govardhan Giri Govardhan Giri Govardhan Jaya Giri Govardhan. Jaya Gora Nitai Jaya Gora Nitai Gora Nitai Jaya Gora Nitai. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Prabhupada. Nitai Gaura Haribol 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 Nitai Gaura. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath ki, Shri Giri Govardhan ki, Shri Shri Nitai Gaura Hari ki, Harinam Sankirtan ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Gaur Premanande, Hari Hari Bol. So I thank the management and Rukmini, who is in charge of this roster, to grant an opportunity to speak on some verses in Srimad Bhagavatam. Obviously, I see this as the mercy of the devotees upon me, given that we are not qualified to speak, but it gives us a platform to aspire to. So thank you so much for that kind of opportunity. Welcome back, Bhakti Mataji. You're coming all the way from Vrindavan, so you can give me some special blessing. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, that was. So you got the verse there? So let's just do the pronounce each word, and then we'll go for the sentences, each line. Sainapatyam charajyam cha dhanda netritvam evacha sarva lokadhipatyam cha veda shastra vid arhati shainapatyam charajyam cha dhanda netridvam evacha sarva lokadhipatyam cha veda shastra vedarhati shainapatyam charajyam cha Dhanda netridvam evacha Sarva lokadipatyam cha Veda shastra vedarhati Shainapatyam charajam cha Danda netritvam evacha Sarvalokadipatyam cha Veda shastra vidarati Shainapatyam charajam cha Danda netritvam evacha Sarvalokadipatyam cha Veda shastra vidarati Shainapatyam charajam cha Danda netvam evacha Sarvalokadipatyam cha Veda shastra vidarati Shainapatyam cha rajam cha Danda nitritvam evacha Sarvalokadipatyam cha Veda shastra vidarati Sayapatyam charaja cha Danda nitritvam evacha Sarvalokadhipatyam cha Veda shastra vidarati. Vaishnavis. Shainapatyam cha rajam cha Danda netridvam evacha Sarvalokadipatyam cha Veda shastra vidarati Shainapatyam charajam cha Danda nitridvam evacha Sarvalokadipatyam cha Veda shastra vidarati. So the word for word, Shainapatyam, post of commander-in-chief, Cha, and Rajyam, post of ruler over the kingdom, Cha, and Danda, ruling, Netritvam, leadership, Eva, certainly, Cha, and Sarva, all, Loka Adipatyam, proprietorship of the planets, Cha, and Veda Shastravit, one who knows the purport of Vedic literature, Arhati, deserves. So the translation and the purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Since only a person who's completely educated according to the principles of Vedic knowledge, deserves to be commander-in-chief, ruler of the state, the first to chastise, and the proprietor of the whole planet. Prithu Maharaj offered everything to the Kumaras. So let me offer the invocation and then you can repeat the translation. Narayanam namaskrityam naram chaiva narottamam devim saraswati vyasam tato jaye udhiraye. Nasta prayeshu abhadreshu nittam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati uttama shloke bhaktir bhavati naistake. Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. Since only a person who is completely educated according to the principles of Vedic knowledge deserves to be commander-in-chief, ruler of the state, the first to chastise, and the proprietor of the whole planet, Prithu Maharaj offered everything to the Kumaras. So please repeat. Since only a person who is completely educated according to the principles of Vedic knowledge deserves to be commander-in-chief, ruler of the state, the first to chastise, and the proprietor of the whole planet, Prithu Maharaj offered everything to the Kumaras. The purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. In this verse, it is very clearly stated that a kingdom, state or empire must be governed under the instructions of saintly persons and brahmanas like the Kumaras. When monarchy ruled throughout the world, the monarch was actually directed by a board of brahmanas and saintly persons. The king, as the administrator of the state, executed his duties as a servant of the brahmanas. It was not that the kings or brahmanas were dictators, nor did they consider themselves proprietors of the state. The kings were also well versed in Vedic literatures and thus were familiar with the injunction of Sri Ishopanishad, Ishavasya idam sarvam, Ishavasyam idam sarvam. Everything that exists belongs to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna also claims that He is the proprietor of all planetary systems, Sarva Loka Maheshwaram. Since this is the case, no one can claim to be the proprietor of the state. The king, president, or head of state should always remember that he is not superior, not the proprietor, but the servant. In the present age, the king or president forgets that he is the servant of God and thinks himself as the servant of the people. The present democratic government is proclaimed to be a people's government, a government by the people and for the people. But this type of government is not sanctioned by the Vedas. The Vedas maintain that a kingdom should be governed for the purpose of satisfying the Supreme Personality of Godhead and should therefore be ruled by a representative of the Lord. The head of a state should not be appointed if he is bereft of all Vedic knowledge. In this verse, it is clearly stated, Veda Shastra Vid Aharati, that all high government posts are especially meant for persons who are well conversant with the teachings of the Vedas. In the Vedas, there are definite instructions defining how a king, commander-in-chief, soldier, and citizen should behave. Unfortunately, there are many so-called philosophers in the present age who give instruction without citing authority, and many leaders follow their unauthorized instruction. Consequently, people are not happy. The modern theory of dialectical communism, set forth by Karl Marx and followed by communist governments, is not perfect. According to Vedic communism, no one in the state should ever starve. Presently, there are many bogus institutions which are collecting funds from the public for the purposes of giving food to starving people. But these funds are invariably misused. According to the Vedic instructions, the government should arrange things in such a way that there will be no question of starvation. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, it is stated that a householder must see to it that even a lizard or a snake does not starve. They also must be given food. In actuality, however, there's no question of starvation because everything is the property of the Supreme Lord, and He sees to it that there is ample arrangement for feeding everyone. In the Vedas, Katha Upanishad 2:13, it is said, Eko bahunam yo vidati kaman. The Supreme Lord supplies the necessities of life to everyone, and there is no question of starvation. If anyone starves, it is due to the mismanagement of the so-called ruler, governor, or president. It is clear, therefore, that a person who is not well versed in the Vedic injunctions, Veda Shastra Vit, should not run for election as president, governor, etc. Formerly, kings were Raja Rishis, which meant that although they were serving as kings, they were good as saintly persons because they would not transgress any of the injunctions of the Vedic scriptures and would rule under the direction of great saintly persons and brahmanas. According to this arrangement, modern presidents, governors, and chief executive officers are all unworthy of their posts because they are not conversant with Vedic administrative knowledge, and they do not take direction from great saintly persons and brahmanas. Because of his disobedience to the orders of the Vedas and the brahmanas, King Vena, Prithu Maharaj's father, was killed by the brahmanas. Prithu Maharaj therefore knew very well that it behoved him to rule the planet as the servant of the saintly persons and brahmanas. Om Gyanati Mirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostude Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sutta Devi Pranamami Haripriya. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare. Vancha kalpadarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyevacha patitanam pavanibhyo vaishnavibhyo namo namo. Mukam karoti vachalam pangam langayati girim yat kripatam aham vande Shri Guru Dinatarinam. So it's a very, very powerful verse on leadership. And I'll repeat the translation. Since only a person who's completely educated according to the principles of Vedic knowledge, deserves to be commander-in-chief, ruler of the state, the first to chastise and the proprietor of the whole planet, Prithu Maharaj offered everything to the Kumaras. So the context, well, firstly, in the wake of the great saintly persons who have been speaking recently, and the dynamism in which they presented the depth of Srimad Bhagavatam and their realizations, all we can say is that we are like fireflies in the brilliance of the sun. But by the mercy of the devotees, we shall attempt to explain something and hope by the process that the speaker is thus purified. So a very, very powerful verse on leadership. The context, this fourth canto mostly is the conversation between Vidura and Maitreya Rishi. When Vidura left after being insulted by Duryodhana, he went on pilgrimage. He did not even know what was happening in the Mahabharata war until he came upon now Maitreya Rishi in his travels on the bank of the Ganga. And then here he submits to Maitreya Rishi and he begins to question Maitreya Rishi about the significance of life. So in the course of that discussion, we hear about the lineage of Prithu Maharaj, whose father, King Vena, was very sinful and unfortunately had to be put on the throne because there was no suitable candidate at that time. But given his nefarious activities and his sinful inclinations, the Brahmanas deposed him, they annihilated him, removed him from the post. So we see within the administrative structure of the Vedas, the Kshatriyas, the ruling class, were meant to be kings of saintly character who submit to a board of Brahmanas. The Brahmanical council would give advice and the kings would rule according to that advice. So Vena was annihilated because he was so sinful. And now we are seeing the lineage and the pastime of King Prithu, who's actually Shaktya Avesh Avatar. Vishnu himself expands in this position. And King Prithu's coronation was the first coronation of a king in this world, done by Lord Brahma himself. Jai Shri Shri Radha Radhanath ki, Shri Giri Govardhan ki, Shri Shri Nitai Gaur Hari ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. So we see Vidura is inquiring, and then King Prithu is placed, installed as the king, and then he glorifies the sages, and the sages glorify him. And eventually the citizens, in the last canto, Canto 3, the citizens are glorifying King Prithu. And at the end of their glorification, these great saintly persons called the Kumaras come to visit King Prithu. So we can see how King Prithu receives them with great etiquette, submitting himself before them as their menial servant. And, he welcomes them. Swagatam vo dvija shrestha. Swagatam, welcome. Welcome, Dvija, Shrestha. Shrestha means the most excellent. Bhakta Shrestha Pralad, the topmost. Shrestha, the topmost. Dvija, the Brahmanas. And later on you see in the purport, the Srila Prabhupada of that verse, he changes Dvija to Vaishnava Shestra. Topmost of all Vaishnavas. Welcome. Your king welcomes them. Swagatam, Swagatam. Come. And then he offers all respects to them. And the example of how saintly persons should receive other saintly persons. And not just for the king, because we learn how devotees, householders, should receive saintly persons, and Prabhupada emphasized preachers of Sanatana Dharma. And the households that do not do that, who may be full of opulence, but do not do that, they are empty and they are to be considered filled with serpents. So, it behoves the devotees, they should extend themselves. They should have programs at home, invite devotees. At least once a year, do something. So we see the example that's being given, how householders should receive. So the question I can ask you is like, why do you think the Kumaras visited King Prithu? So we understand the Kumaras are the great. There are 4 Kumaras. There's a whole story of that for those of you not familiar. But just for now, it's sufficient to understand they are great devotees of the Lord. And they Kumar, they are in Kumar meaning they are like youth. They're very old, but they are youthful. And these 4 baby-like, boy-like Kumars visited King Prithu. Who are they? Sanat, Kumar, Shanak, Sanandana, and Sanatana, the 4 Kumaras. They visit. Any ideas? Why did they visit King Prithu? What is the reason why saintly people would visit anybody's home? Sukumari? To give blessings, okay? Right? Sibusiso? To teach them, yeah. This is Sibusiso, He's been coming around a little while now. He's been helping Rupa Vilas Prabhu down in the kitchen, cleaning vegetables. Yesterday I spoke to him, very intelligent young man. He's got a lot of questions, very interested. I told him, come this morning, and he did. So, and he has his hand in the bead bag, so that's really great. It's taken to the process. Yeah, yes? So you were saying, to teach them, what else? Yes, give them the opportunities for service. Any other idea? Jaipur? Right. Okay, so in the system, in the structure, the Brahmanas are the head, the Kshatriyas, in this case, Prithu Maharaj is the Kshatriya, the leader. So they would go and visit them. But for what purpose? Enlightenment. Yes? Many other ideas. So Srila Prabhupada explains also in a previous purport that it's actually also to demonstrate how a householder, or in this case Kshatriya, should balance his spiritual and worldly duties so that he can conduct. Because he's Kshatriya, he's got a duty. He can conduct his worldly duties, but it has to be balanced with spiritual duties. And that balance is to receive the saintly persons and serve them. and take enlightenment from them. But there's one more reason, that in the beginning, when Prithu appeared and was being consecrated as the king, then who else appeared? Beside Lord Brahma, who else appeared in that arena personally? Vishnu. And Vishnu told him that the Kumaras will visit you. So, it's a fulfillment of the prophecy, and the Kumaras are bound to the Lord's words, and the Lord gets bound to the devotees' words, vice versa, and they appeared here to benedict him. So, Prithu knew, King Prithu knew the qualities of saintly persons. Don't we sing Shakshad Daridvena Samasta Shastre? That the devotee is to be considered non-different from the Lord because he's the most confidential servant of the Lord. Right? So King Prithu knew this, and he received the saintly persons in that way. So we find that then King Prithu begins to inquire from, he receives them and they are pleased, and therefore they bless him. And then he inquires from them, what are the duties of one who's entangled in this world? Kind of reflecting his own position, right? In a humble way, although we know he's Shakti Vesh avatar and he's pure, but he's asking for the benefit of all the householders. How can a person who's entangled in this world be blessed with auspiciousness? And then, after hearing from King Prithu and his questions, the Kumaras are very pleased. And then Sanat Kumar begins to speak. And he speaks several subject matters about how the living entity can be enlightened. So you'll find all the previous verses speaks about that, and how the devotees of the Lord should be always engaged in the service of the lotus feet of the Lord. So the instructions to the householders are being given. And now this verse very, very specifically is speaking about leadership, and it's a direct instruction to Prithu because he is a leader of society. And this verse is not being spoken by the Kumars, but you know that Srimad Bhagavatam is a conversation that has very many intertwining conversations, and you have to try to understand who is speaking at which point. So here, the commentary is actually being given by Maitreya Rishi to Vidura, because he's telling Vidura, since only a person who is completely educated according to the principles of Vedic knowledge deserves to be commander-in-chief ruler of the state, the first to chastise and the proprietor of the whole planet, Prithu Maharaj offered everything to the Kumaras. Maitreya is saying, this is what Prithu Maharaj did. He's offered everything to the Kumaras. So, in the verse, in the purport, let's look at the purport and try to analyze it in the last 17 minutes. In this verse, it is very clearly stated that the kingdom, state, or empire must be governed under the instructions of saintly persons and brahmanas like the Kumaras. When monarchy ruled throughout the world, the monarch was actually directed by a board of brahmanas and saintly persons. So the Vedic structure does not support what we call democracy as we know it. Although the democratic principles were there in the structure, because the king was a saintly king, the monarch or the aristocrat. So aristocracy was supported. It is only later in the history of the world that the aristocracy became corrupted, because there were also corrupt brahmanas, corrupt priests, which then led to things like the revolutions of the world, the French Revolution, etc., where the aristocracy were beheaded and so on, because people had had enough of corruption, right? So, but the original Vedic civilization, the saintly kings were in charge, and the monarch had his board of brahmanas, and he would take advice about important matters. The king had his own guru, the Kul Guru, and the Guru of the state, right, would be present, and the king would take advice before making many decisions. Even like going to war, should we go to war? He would approach and take the advice from the brahmanas. So they were not dictators, nor did they consider themselves proprietors of the state. They did not think that they owned anything. They considered themselves to be the servants of the people, because they were well versed in the Vedic literatures, especially Prabhupada is citing here Sri Ishopanishad. Everybody knows that verse? Isha Vasyam, Idam Sarvam. Continue. Yad Kinchena Jagatam Jagat. Tena Tyaktena Bunchita. Yeah, that. So he's citing Sri Ishopanishad, and that, what is that verse saying? That everything animate and inanimate is the property of the Lord. And therefore, we should understand that and be satisfied with our quota. So the kings understood that. They understood that so Prabhupada discusses this in Ishopanishad as the Ishavashya principle. So if everybody understands that everything animate and inanimate belongs to the Lord, and we are not proprietors of that, and that we are given a particular quota, and therefore we should not try to usurp the quota given to other people, then everything will be perfect. It is due to this exploitation and the improper understanding, which leads to exploitation, that we have the haves and the have-nots in the world. Because the greed of man is taking more than their quota. So therefore the kings, like these Raja Rishis, they understood this perfectly, and therefore they did not claim to be proprietors of anything. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna also claims that he's the proprietor of all planetary systems. Sarva Loka Maheshwaram. That verse is also a famous verse, 529. Can anyone remember? Bhoktaram Yagya Tapasam. Say together, if you know. Sarva Loka Maheshwaram Suridham Sarva Bhutanam Nyadvamam Shantim Richiti. So, one who knows the Supreme Lord to be the beneficiary of all sacrifices and austerities, the proprietor of all the planets and the demigods, and the ultimate beneficiary, well-wisher of all living entities. What happens to that person? Shantim Richati, becomes peaceful. So we were doing Bhakti Shastri, and we're now at the 5th chapter, and there Prabhupada also explains that this idea of proprietorship. How can we, he speaks about false renunciation, and how the Mayavadis have false idea of renunciation, where they say, I give up everything and I renounce the world. So Prabhupada explains, this is also an illusion. How can you renounce what you don't own? You don't own anything. So where's the question of renunciation? The real renunciation is to understand that I don't own anything. Everything animate and inanimate belongs to the Lord. So therefore, I will use it in the service of the Lord, and that is the proper renunciation. So these kings understood that. So Sarva Loka Maheshwaram, he is the proprietor of all the planetary systems. Since this is the case, no one can claim to be proprietor of the state. So here's quite an indictment on present governments. We don't want to, make this a political speech of any kind, but the criteria given so explicitly in the purport that the deficiencies of the governments that we are facing become so blatant. It's like a checklist, and you can tick it off. So it says, in the present age, the king or president forgets that he's a servant of God and thinks himself as a servant of the people. So there is the saying, what service to man is service to God. While it seems noble, and it's not saying that we should not serve the people. But if you serve the people without understanding that you're a servant of God and that there is God, and by service to God is service to man, then you're missing the point, because that service becomes relative. God is the absolute truth, and service to God includes all of the people. So the present democratic government is proclaimed to be a people's government, a government by the people and for the people, but this type of government is not sanctioned by the Vedas. So what happens in this kind of situation where people vote for government is that Prabhupada explains, Science of Self-Realization, that people will vote by vox populi. I hope the French is correct, V-O-U-X. If it has an S in the end, it would be vous. Right? You speak French, so vox is correct? V-O-U-X in French. Vox populi. So vox populi, meaning that people get elected by popular vote. And why are they popular? Is because they give the most sense gratification to people. The one who can give the population the most sense gratification, he is the most popular. So he or she gets is elected. But the one, for example, there was a billboard in India we saw during some part of the elections, in one of the big elections in the past, and they put up on the board there, vote for one who supports no gambling, no intoxication, no illicit sex, and no meat eating. So imagine if that is your party policy, or that is your manifesto, your political manifesto. We support the following things. Please vote for us. Will you vote? Will people vote? No. Because for them you are obstructing their sense gratification. What? No meeting, no braai. Oh. National pastime of South Africa. Wow, no. Right? No intoxication. Shoo. Therefore, to get popular, then what they did was the day of the Sabbath, the Sunday in which bottle stores and liquor outlets were closed before, at least within the Christian national policy of the previous government. Now they opened it. On Sunday you can walk into any liquor store now. It's no more respected as a day of the Sabbath. So whoever does that as their part of the political manifesto, yes, fine, I'll vote for you. So we do not say that the aristocracy is so bureaucratic that they do not listen to the people. The king, this Raja Rishi, had a huge hall called the Sabha. And in that Sabha, all the ministers would gather, the king would sit at the head, and the people, the ordinary people, could line up and present their grievance to the king personally. So much so that I can't recall which Shastra, but there is a pastime of a person an elderly man whose son died. And he came to the king to complain to the king that you must have done something, that's why my son died. And how? Is it Ram Leela? So why? Because according to the Vedic culture, if it is practiced properly, then it is the elders who will pass away first, not the premature passing away of young children. So the natural development was that the elderly would pass away. So if younger persons are passing away, it means that the king has done something wrong. Is impious in some way. So they would complain, and the king would then listen, and he would give his judgment within the matter of a few minutes or deliberation with the ministers, and he'd give the judgment. Not court cases that drag on for years at the expense of the taxpayers' money, for years and years and years. And then at the end of it, the person gets acquitted because they have not enough evidence or the files have disappeared. Not that kind of system. The king would listen, very astute. And he had his brahmanas, he had the ministers who would counsel immediately. So this is the type of government that would be in the Vedas. The Vedas maintain that the kingdom should be governed for the purpose of satisfying the supreme personality of Godhead and should therefore be ruled by a representative of the Lord. The head of a state should not be appointed if he is bereft of Vedic knowledge. Therefore, to go back to the verse, since only a person who is completely educated according to the principles, I don't know whether this seems to be my karma or my dharma, but I end up with the verses on education. So we spoke the last time about how Prabhupada said the education we are receiving in university is slaughterhouse education. And that the natural propensity of the living entity to become a devotee of the Lord is slaughtered by the materialistic ideologies that perpetuate very insidiously through what we call the curricula. Those curricula end up making you more of a materialistic person than a devotee of the Lord. It takes you away from that. So here we're seeing the education. Therefore the Raja Rishis themselves went to the Gurukul. There was no such thing as royal prince in the Gurukul. They shared the same menial tasks with the Brahmana's children. They would draw water from the well. They would collect firewood. They would do menial tasks for the Gurukul, in the school of the Guru. We see by Krishna's example, Sandipani Muni. He served Sandipani Muni menially. He and Balaram. So the examples are given of that. And Kumara Acharya Pragyo. This is given by Prahlad Maharaj. That at the age of 5 years old, children should be educated in this sublime philosophy. So the Gurukul was set up so that the young boys would go live with the Guru. But the girls, because they are protected, they are a vulnerable population, they are protected within the Vedic civilization, they would not be sent to a school far away from their home because their mothers were expected to be practicing devotees, and they would teach by the example the qualities and characteristics and activities that young girls should have. So they would be raised in that situation. But the boys would go, and the boys would stay with the Guru for years, till 25 at least. So here we see that the ruler should be a representative of the Lord. He should not be appointed if he's bereft of Vedic knowledge. And with due respect, we see the leaders of society are bereft of spiritual knowledge. They may externally claim to be belonging to this particular religious institution or not, but their activities speak otherwise. Yad yad acharati shreshtas tad tad evataro jana. What is that? Sayam praman kurute lokastad anuvartate. Whatever action a great man performs, common men follow. And whatever examples he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. So when you look around in society and you see crime is on the increase, as we know, it is because the leaders are setting examples of crime. And therefore the people think this is okay. And if the leaders can get away with it, then we can get away with it too. And therefore the governments become toothless dogs, toothless wolves. They cannot exercise the might of the law because they have no potency, because they've become bereft of their devotional qualities. Yet if they had these devotional qualities, irrespective of what type of religious institution they may follow, because the principles of all religion teach one that one should worship God with all thy mind and thy heart and thy soul, as said in the biblical teachings. And if one gives thy mind, thy heart and thy soul to God, then you will be imbibing the religious principles and exercising that even in your judgments and your decisions as a politician. But that is not happening. Therefore, we are also coming, we can see that this society seems to be the society under the rule of King Vena rather than King Prithu, because the Venas are ruling. And the societies, the dacoits, are emerging because there's nobody to give them any definite sentencing and so on. So by King Prithu, we can pray. Therefore we have this salvation is this Krishna consciousness. It looks dire, and I think I can conclude it. The society looks dire, the world situation is in a turmoil, violence everywhere, nation against nation, religion against religion, and in individual capacity, it's predicted in 12 canto, brother against brother. But asti eko mahat guna. Kirtan ad eva Krishnasya mukta sangam parambraji. That there is one good quality. And that one good quality is this Krishna Kirtan. I was reading a conversation Prabhupada was having with his disciples about this war situation. Prabhupada predicted the war between Pakistan and India, by the way, in these conversations. But he said that what will happen if the devotees ask you, what will happen if the whole world is now in turmoil and war? Prabhupada said, after the turmoil will be favorable for Krishna consciousness. See, the same idea happens where happened in Bhagavad Gita. The armies of the world divided between dharma and adharma, and millions were killed. The purging of the planet took place where the demoniac were vanquished. Just as much as the toxins of the body may accumulate in one place and become a boil. Then the surgeon with a lance will clear it out. Similarly, the world situation will become purged of the toxins by even a world war. And after that will emerge a new order in which Krishna consciousness will flourish. It's predicted 10,000 years by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So why won't it happen? We have to have great faith in that. And even if we are engaged in turmoil in a war and we are caught up, you see, somebody asked a question, how is it that devotees who are practicing this spiritual life, they get caught up? Because the collective karma of this planet is so strong that everybody becomes swept up in that. But the devotee's destination is different. Because we're not the body. The spiritual destination is different. Whereas the demoniac, Krishna says, I cast them into lower and lower species. And that's what will happen to them. So we need not really worry, we should have faith. And we should maybe, we can take all the precautions against being exploited, being abused, etc. And then, as Prabhupada did in the middle of World War II, while the bombs were going all around Calcutta, some hot kachoris were just made for him. And the devotee said, let's go to the shelter. He said, no, I will take these hot kachoris now. So while the bombs were going off all over, Prabhupada was relishing prasada, and he left it to Krishna. Whether the bombs, and none of that affected, right? So, and they did Harinam in Kolkata, and the violence, the attacks, they all subsided. So there's lots more in this purport. There's so much more to say about this, and perhaps the next persons can take it up. There is one theory discussed about dialectical communism of Karl Marx that may take a little while to analyze, but basically Prabhupada is saying this dialectical means conflict, and Karl Marx's idea of communism, that there is a conflict between the working class and the bourgeoisie, those who own the factors of production, and it'll always be in there until we get a classless society. But that's not the Vedic understanding. The Vedic understanding is Chaturvarnya Maya Shristam Guna Karma Vibhagasa. According to the nature and the propensity and the inclination of the different living entities, I create, Krishna says, this Varnashra Dharma. So there will always be people of different propensities and inclinations, and therefore there will always be different classes of people. But the central idea is the worship of Krishna, and therefore this communism that is given by Marx is an artificial structure, because the real communism is spiritual communism, as Srila Prabhupada had that discussion with Professor Kotovsky in 1971 when he went to Russia, and it is recorded in Science of Self-Realization. That spiritual communism, and Srila Prabhupada refers to that here in this purport, that a householder must see to it that even a lizard or snake does not starve. When you cook your prasada, when you offer it to the Lord, the first thing you should look to see if there's somebody hungry and give them some. And then if there's a lizard in your house, which we find annoying because they leave their little poo all over the place, you want to block your vents out with muslin cloth so they don't come through and so on. So, but even if a lizard is there in your house, somehow they have to get something, right? So, and a snake. So the Vedic culture is that precise, that every living entity should get something. So instead of throwing your waste food in the bin, have a sacred throw-out place, or take the grains and spread it out on the grass and let the birds come and eat. So there's no question of starvation if the leaders are God conscious, if the leaders understand the Ishavasya principle, and that they have a duty to ensure that those who are under them, the charges in society, also have the opportunities to progress in Krishna consciousness. So we create that. And they should be the persons who are called the Veda Shastra Vit. Those who are well educated in the Vedic science. They should be the ones to run for election. So perhaps we can think of somebody in our movement may stand for election at some stage. And we can take a lot of instruction from this. Others who may say they do not belong to the Vedic culture, that is fine, but they can take instruction from this knowledge. They can absorb it and then become better practitioners of what they are practicing. So thank you very much for your kind attention and participation in this class. Is there any comment or questions that you may have? 20 to 9. Let's just 5 minutes. Give Jai Satchidananda Prabhu.
Yeah, Hare Krishna. Thank you. Very enlightening. Yeah, I was thinking about the Ishavasya, the principle from the Ishopanishad. If Krishna is proprietor, the Lord is the Supreme Lord's proprietor, He's supplying everything, and how is that there is starvation in the world? Presently we see that, isn't this? And it's because they've hijacked, the unscrupulous leaders have hijacked. They want a kingdom of God without God. And then, we come to the understanding that 1/5 of the world's population, like the bourgeoisie or the big oligarchs of the world, they control 1/5, they own 1/5 or 4/5 of the world's resources. Therefore, this artificial kind of starvation is there, or artificial products. They hold the world to ransom, isn't by fixing a price, very high. Even like bread and milk, isn't everyday commodities like for man in the street, they're paying so much for things. So it's
thank you for that.
Exploitations there.
That is indeed the case. To maintain prices and not let the prices drop, societies that produce surpluses, like surplus of milk, surplus of butter, they dump it in the ocean so that the market is not flooded, because the economic principle is that when there's an oversupply, the price comes down. So they don't want the prices to come down. They will not even ship that to the starving nations. They will dump it in the ocean. So much of waste. And you can see Krishna's bounty is so much he can give. If there is the surplus that they can dump, that means Krishna's bounty is so much that he can give so much. But the greed of nations. And the economic principle of economic development and institutes like IMF, International Monetary Fund, and so on, their policy of giving aid is not to develop, but to keep nations underdeveloped. Because you are now in a dependent position, and as soon as you have taken the aid, you are now bound by strings of conditions in which you have to pay back by the resources that you have in your land, which you could use for your own development. This is called unbeneficiated. Imagine that, how close that word is. Unbeneficiated minerals, meaning you send the minerals out of your country, to a first world nation who has the industry and the expertise to beneficiate it, meaning to produce it into some useful product, then they sell it back to you at triple or quadruple the price. Prabhupada said that, like islands like Mauritius and so on, if you get rid of the sugar cane and plant vegetables, and your nation will become self-sufficient. So the sugar cane is a colonial imposition. Tea is a colonial imposition. Who was it supplying? Coffee, cocoa, cacao, all of these things have been produced in those countries to supply the first world countries. The Amazon forests are being devastated, I think at a rate of about 80 to 100 football field sizes a day, to make way for cattle ranching. And that cattle ranching is not even feeding, for those who eat meat, not even feeding the local population. That meat is being exported to the greedy metropolitan areas of the US and Europe. And the people's homes are displaced. As soon as the tractors come, there's some kind of saying in Spanish, which I can't remember now, but they say as soon as they see the tree fellers and the tractors, they know it's time to pick up their belongings and move, because their houses will all be damaged. Thousands of people displaced. So this is the kind of situation in the world. I guess, as devotees we live in a more protected environment. Sometimes we don't see or read these things and so on. But that is the horror of the world that's out there. And it's a Krishna conscious solution. So therefore, communities like, what is it? Is it New Govardhan in Shivaram Swami's project? In Hungary. Anyway, his project in Hungary, right? He's developed a project in which all devotees live. They all are occupied according to their propensities. It's a farm community. It's a model that's open to people to come visit, like tourists and so on. And the government is taking advice from them how to develop this community. And they got awarded accolades for that community. So can you just see the situation that in the future, Prabhupada said we must develop the farm communities. Because in the future, when your motor vehicles are all stuck on the road without petrol, and you see the catastrophic results of all the upturned and devastated vehicles after the aftermath of a war, you will be looking to find food and safety. And that is when our farm communities will show the world what it is like to live in harmony with land and proper use of your propensities. So, thank you very much for inspiring that comment. So it's only 10 to 9. I know it's late for breakfast and so on. And thank you very much for the kind opportunities, despite our lack of qualification. It is a very, very humbling thought to know that Srila Prabhupada has given us an opportunity despite our very, very inferior positions. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna. Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda ki, Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol.